While JD Vance sped through the armored streets of a total lockdown in Islamabad, desperately trying to keep a fragile U.S.-Iran ceasefire from collapsing and the Strait of Hormuz from igniting a global oil crisis. Jimmy Kimmel walked onto the stage in Hollywood, stared straight into the camera, and unleashed a brutal takedown, ripping apart Donald Trump's pathetic genius myth and exposing how the man who claims to have the greatest mind in history can't stop obsessing over his own ego while the world teeters on the brink of disaster. The lights in Studio 3 at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood were already burning hot even before the show started. This was Jimmy Kimmel Live, one of the biggest late-night shows in America, taped right in the heart of Los Angeles. The audience was filing in, but the usual easy chatter was missing. Instead, people were glued to their phones, whispering to each other about what was happening on the other side of the world. "Did you see the news from Pakistan?" one guy said to his friend. "Vance is over there right now trying to keep things from blowing up with Iran." The energy in the room was tense. Like everyone knew this wasn't going to be a regular comedy show. You could almost feel the worry hanging in the air before Jimmy even stepped on stage. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe in Islamabad, JD Vance's convoy was speeding through the streets under heavy guard. Armored SUVs, flashing lights, and dozens of security agents formed a moving wall around the vice president. The whole city had been locked down. Reuters was blasting the latest updates. The ceasefire between the United States and Iran was incredibly fragile after weeks of conflict. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow strip of water that carries so much of the world's oil, was still the biggest headache. One mistake there and gas prices back home would skyrocket and global markets would go crazy. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel walked out onto the stage under those hot studio lights, mic in hand, and the crowd gave him the usual cheer. But it wasn't the loud, loose applause you normally hear on a Tuesday night. People were still half distracted, phones glowing in their laps with updates from Pakistan. Jimmy didn't waste time with small talk. He jumped straight in. "Folks, let's talk about something that keeps coming up lately," he said with that familiar half smile. Then he hit play on the big screen behind him. There was Trump, in full rally mode, pointing at his own head and declaring, "I have the highest IQ. I'm a stable genius. I aced every test. Nobody has a mind like mine." The clip was crystal clear, Trump's voice booming through the speakers. The audience started laughing, but it was thin, almost polite. Like they knew the joke was coming, but the timing felt off with everything else going on in the world. Jimmy let the laughter fade quickly. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage and looked straight at the crowd. "Here's the thing," he said, his tone shifting. "Trump doesn't just say this stuff randomly. There's a pattern. Every single time the pressure ramps up, when Iran starts acting up, when the Strait of Hormuz turns into a ticking time bomb, when sanctions are on the table and the whole world is watching, he suddenly turns into the smartest guy in the room. The genius talk kicks in like clockwork. It's not confidence, it's a reflex." He paused, letting that sink in. The studio felt quieter now. Jimmy wasn't rushing through the jokes like usual. He was slowing everything down on purpose, making people actually look at what they'd been hearing for years. When the heat is on, out comes the greatest hits. Stable genius, Wharton, perfect scores, low IQ enemies. It's like he needs to say it before anyone can ask real questions about what's actually happening. Then came the real punch. Jimmy nodded to his producer and the screen lit up again. This time it wasn't one clip. It was a fast-cut montage of Trump over the years. Trump boasting about his big brain right after news broke about North Korea tensions. Trump yelling, "I'm a genius," during the height of the pandemic chaos. Trump doing the same thing when trade wars were heating up and markets were tanking. Each clip was time-stamped, each one lined up with a real crisis moment. The audience watched in silence at first, then the laughs died completely. People just stared, mouths slightly open. The montage ended and the screen went dark. For a second, nobody made a sound. Then from the middle of the crowd, a man stood up. He looked like a regular guy in his 40s wearing a plain button-down shirt. But his voice carried across the studio like a crack of thunder. "He does this every single time," the man shouted. "I worked for him. I saw it up close. Whenever things get real and scary, he panics and starts talking about how smart he is. Every damn time." The audience erupted. Some people gasped, others started clapping hard, and a few yelled in agreement. Jimmy didn't smile right away. He just nodded slowly at the man and said, "Thank you for saying that out loud." The energy in the room had completely flipped. What started as light chuckles had turned into something heavier, sharper. People weren't just watching a comedy bit anymore. They were seeing the pattern laid out in front of them, clear as day, and it hit different when the world was already on edge about Iran, Vance in Pakistan, and that fragile ceasefire that could fall apart any minute. Jimmy took a small breath and kept going, his voice steady. Half a world away, inside a heavily guarded conference room in Islamabad, JD Vance sat at a long polished table. The air was thick with tension. Pakistani security forces had locked the entire city down tight, roadblocks everywhere, rooftops lined with snipers, and no one moving without clearance. Vance leaned forward, his voice low but firm, and looked directly at the Iranian delegation across the table. "Let me be very clear," he said. "Do not play games with the United States. This ceasefire is fragile, and if it breaks, the consequences will be severe." The room went dead quiet. No one smiled. Outside, the streets of Islamabad were empty except for military vehicles and flashing lights. The whole capital felt like it was holding its breath. Back in the Kimmel studio, the big screen switched to live footage from Pakistan. Jimmy Kimmel pointed at it and shook his head. "Look at this," he said to the audience. "Right now, Vance is in a locked-down city trying to handle the real stuff, frozen assets, what's happening in Lebanon, keeping those shipping lanes open so oil doesn't stop flowing. One wrong move and gas prices here at home go through the roof. That's what serious looks like." Then Jimmy cut back to a fresh clip of Trump from just hours earlier. There he was again, standing in front of a crowd, pumping his fist and shouting, "I have the giant brain. Nobody thinks better than me." The contrast hit the audience like a slap. On one side of the world, the vice president was negotiating under heavy guard to stop a war from restarting. On the other side, the president was still yelling about how smart he was. A few people in the studio let out nervous laughs, but most just sat there stunned. Jimmy didn't let the moment slip. He stepped closer to the camera, his face serious. While Vance is trying to keep the Strait of Hormuz from turning into a disaster zone, Trump is back home demanding everyone admire his giant brain. It's like the administration is split in two. One half is dealing with actual life or death diplomacy. The other half is stuck in a loop of self-praise. That's when Jimmy dropped the bomb. He held up his phone and read from a leaked quote that had just come in from a former aide. Trump once told his staff during a briefing, "Make sure you remind everyone that I'm the genius in the room. Say it out loud if you have to." The audience exploded. Gasps turned into loud boos and shouts of disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" someone yelled from the back rows. Phones started lighting up as people texted friends. The noise was so loud the band had to stop playing for a second. Jimmy waited for the roar to settle just a little, then hit them with the direct question. He looked straight into the camera and asked, "Is that what Vance is selling abroad right now? Is he over there in Islamabad trying to convince Iran and Pakistan that America is run by serious adults, while the boss back home keeps demanding everyone call him a genius?" The studio erupted again, even louder this time. People were standing, clapping, and shouting. One woman near the front shook her head and said, "This is embarrassing." Jimmy didn't smile. He just nodded slowly and let the reaction roll through the room. Jimmy Kimmel kept the pressure on. He looked straight at the camera like he was talking right to Vance in that lockdown room in Islamabad. "So here's the real question, JD," he said, his voice steady and sharp. "Are you over there selling disciplined statecraft? Or are you just trying to wrap the same old genius fairy tale in some diplomatic bow and hope nobody notices?" The studio went quiet for a beat, then a wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd. People shifted in their seats. This wasn't a throwaway joke anymore. Jimmy was putting the whole thing on the table. Right then, phones in the control room started buzzing like crazy. One of the producers signaled frantically. Jimmy glanced over, nodded, and the big screen behind him lit up with a brand new tweet from Trump. It had just dropped seconds ago. The text was pure rage. "Jimmy Kimmel is a low-rated loser with no talent. He's obsessed with me because he knows I'm a genius, and he's not. Sad. Vance should be focused on winning, not listening to this garbage." Trump had tagged Kimmel and thrown in a few extra insults about the show being dying television. The audience lost it. People jumped to their feet, cheering and booing at the same time. Jimmy didn't miss a beat. He stared at the tweet on the giant screen and started roasting it live. "Wow, okay," he said with a dry laugh. "He just called me low-rated while he's the one who can't stop talking about how smart he is during a major international crisis. That's rich. Hey, Donald, if you're watching, and I know you are, maybe tweet less about your brain and let your vice president do his actual job in Pakistan." The crowd roared even louder, some waving their arms, others shouting, "Get him, Jimmy!" The energy was electric. Phones were out everywhere, recording the moment as it happened. Jimmy kept going, feeding off the room. "Look at this timing," he said, pointing at the tweet. "Vance is in a city under total lockdown trying to stop a war from restarting, and Trump's over here firing off tweets like a kid who just got called out on the playground. This is exactly what we're talking about. The boss can't help himself." The audience was fully on their feet now, clapping and yelling in approval. The whole studio felt like it was vibrating. Then Jimmy raised his hand for a little quiet. The lights dimmed slightly as he played a short audio clip that had just been leaked from a private call Trump made to one of his advisors earlier that evening. Trump's voice came through the speakers, loud and angry. "Make sure they know I'm the smartest. Tell them again and again, I'm the genius here. Don't let them forget it." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. No rally crowd, no applause track, just Trump yelling in a private conversation. The laughter that had been building died instantly. People sat back down, faces shifting from amusement to straight-up shock. A woman in the third row put her hand over her mouth. A guy next to her whispered, "Holy shit, that's real?" The room turned dead quiet except for a few scattered gasps. This wasn't comedy anymore. It felt like a diagnosis. Jimmy let the silence stretch for a few seconds before he spoke again, his voice lower now. "That's not a leader handling pressure," he said. "That's someone who can't stop centering himself, even when the whole world is watching a ceasefire that could fall apart any minute. Vance is over there dealing with frozen assets, shipping lanes, and real talks with Iran, and this is what's coming out of the top. How is anyone supposed to take us seriously?" The audience stayed quiet for a long moment, processing what they'd just heard. Then the murmurs started again, louder and more serious. A few people nodded slowly. Others looked angry. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump was losing it. The moment he saw the clips from Kimmel's show popping up everywhere, he grabbed his phone and started firing off posts like bullets. "Jimmy Kimmel is a total disaster and a low IQ clown," he wrote. "The fake news media is obsessed with me because they know I'm a genius and they can't stand it. Sad." He didn't stop there. He went after Vance's critics too, calling them weak losers and traitors to the movement. Then, like he couldn't help himself, he looped right back to the same line over and over. "I am a stable genius, the highest IQ. Nobody is smarter than me, Everybody knows it. Post after post, the same words kept coming. It was like watching a man stuck on repeat while the world kept moving. Inside the residence, Trump slammed the phone down and demanded an emergency call with his senior team. The aides scrambled to connect everyone on speaker. As soon as the line went live, his voice exploded through the room. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "You're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to shut this garbage down." He paced back and forth, face red, jabbing his finger in the air even though no one could see him. One of the aides tried to calm him down, but Trump cut him off. "I told you to remind everyone I'm the genius. Why didn't you stop this?" He slammed his fist on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "They're trying to make me look small. Me, the smartest guy in the room." His voice cracked with anger. According to a former aide who later spoke about that night, Trump kept yelling for nearly 10 minutes straight, blaming everyone around him and repeating how brilliant he was, as if saying it louder would make the embarrassment go away. Meanwhile, in that sealed-off conference room in Islamabad, JD Vance's phone buzzed with urgent alerts. Clips from the Kimmel show were flooding in. Vance watched the tweet storm and the leaked audio play out in real time. His jaw tightened. He looked around at his team and the Pakistani officials sitting across the table, then spoke in a low, sharp tone. "This is damaging the negotiations right now," he said. "We're trying to keep a ceasefire alive, and this noise is making us look like amateurs." The room stayed silent. One of the senior Pakistani aides leaned over and whispered just loud enough for Vance to hear, "Your president is making this harder." The words landed like a rock in still water. Tension shot through the roof. The Iranian side exchanged quick glances. Everyone could feel the shift. What was supposed to be a focused diplomatic meeting was now poisoned by headlines from the other side of the world. Vance rubbed his forehead and tried to steer things back on track, but the damage was clear. Every time his phone lit up with another Trump post repeating "genius," it felt like another distraction pulling focus from the real issues on the table: frozen assets, shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz, and keeping the fragile truce from collapsing. The American delegation looked exhausted. The Pakistani hosts stayed polite, but their faces said it all. This was not helping. Back in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel had no idea how far the meltdown had gone yet, but the audience could sense something big was happening. Phones were blowing up with notifications. People kept checking the latest Trump rants and shaking their heads. The show had barely ended when the clips exploded across the internet. Within minutes, millions were watching. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Everywhere you looked, people were stitching together the same four things: JD Vance locked down in Islamabad, the fragile ceasefire with Iran, the constant threat at the Strait of Hormuz, and Trump still screaming about his giant brain. Comments poured in fast. While Vance is trying to stop a war, Trump is demanding applause. This is what the leader of the free world looks like right now. The contrast was brutal and impossible to unsee. Ordinary Americans, no matter which side they were on, kept connecting the dots. One half of the administration was fighting to keep oil flowing and talks alive. The other half was still stuck on ego. Back in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel stood under the lights for his final segment. The audience had gone from laughing to something quieter and more serious. Jimmy didn't try to force more jokes. He looked straight into the camera and delivered the sharpest line of the night. "Real intelligence isn't bragging while your vice president is halfway around the world trying to stop a war," he said. His voice was calm but cutting. "It's knowing when to shut up and let the adults handle the room. Priorities matter, and right now, the priorities are completely out of whack." Then he dropped one last piece of evidence. "I got another message tonight from a former aide who worked inside the White House," Jimmy continued. "He told me Trump panics every single time a real crisis hits. That's when the genius talk gets the loudest. Not because he's confident, because he's scared it's all slipping away." The studio stayed silent. No big laughs this time, Just a heavy, knowing quiet. People nodded slowly. A few wiped their eyes. The confession from the second witness made everything feel even more real. As the credits started to roll, the final image stuck with everyone. Trump wasn't some mastermind pulling secret strings. He looked like the guy who kept interrupting the important conversation. While diplomats and security teams scrambled to keep tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz, while Vance sat in tense rooms trying to hold a ceasefire together, Trump kept jumping in with the same demand. Look at me. Admire me. Say I'm the smartest. He was the interruption in the middle of a serious moment the whole world was trying to survive. Later that night, Trump posted one last time. I am a genius. The highest IQ. Everybody knows it, he wrote, with the usual capital letters and exclamation points. But this time, the replies weren't the usual flood of support. A lot of people just stared at the screen and felt nothing. No laughter, no anger, just a cold realization. The old myth had finally run straight into reality, and reality didn't flinch. In the days that followed, the story didn't fade. Every time someone mentioned Trump's intelligence, the same pictures came back. Vance's convoy rolling through a locked-down Islamabad, oil prices spiking because of the Hormuz tension, and a president who couldn't stop centering himself even when the stakes were this high. The myth didn't die with one monologue, but it cracked badly that night under the studio lights. And once people saw the crack, they couldn't pretend it wasn't there. What started as a late-night comedy bit had turned into something bigger. It showed the difference between performing strength and actually having it, between yelling genius and quietly doing the hard work when it counted. The country kept watching, and the world kept turning. But for a lot of people, the sound of Trump demanding to be admired would now always have a background track. The quiet tension of a fragile ceasefire, the weight of real negotiations, and the simple truth that ego doesn't fix broken peace. The myth had hit reality, and this time it didn't bounce back.